Society is sponsoring with Mike Patterson to hear talk about the Civil War. We're really glad to have such a good showing tonight. My name is Connie Cooley. I'm First Vice President with the Historical Society. And Anita and I welcome you. We'd like to give a special thanks tonight to Kerry McGeth. He's our librarian here in the city, and he's been wonderful to get all of this set up for us so that Mike could make his presentation. If you would, on your chair, there was a sign-in sheet. It's actually a membership form. But we'd also like for you, if you have a pen on the back, to give us your name and contact information so we can put you on our email list. We will be having some more programs going out throughout the year, and we'd like to know who is here, and you can just leave that on the table when you depart tonight. If you haven't already joined the Historical Society, we encourage you to do that. It's very inexpensive, even in these economic times. And in doing so, it helps us continue our work. If you haven't been by the Log House, which is a wonderful reconstructed house in Bicentennial Park with the wildflowers and a wonderful wagon installed, that's the kind of thing that your membership allows the Historical Society to do, as well as putting on programs like this. Before I introduce Anita, I just thank you again for coming tonight. And after the program, if you have a few minutes, please stick around and introduce yourself to Mike and to us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in the future. Anita Robeson is going to introduce Mike for us tonight.
Our speaker tonight, Mike Patterson of Colleyville, is a man who deserves our thanks for having researched and applied for most of the historical markers in Southlake. He has loved history all his life and has spent many years documenting Civil War soldiers who have lived in Southlake, Colleyville, Grapevine, Bedford, and adjoining communities. He has written biographies of hundreds of these soldiers, and you can find a link to them on our website, southlakehistory.org. Feel free to give Mike, on the way out, a few dollars to help pay for the work he does with his monuments, and he'll tell you more about that. The Civil War was a big war with big stories, big battles, big munitions, big destruction. But the war also had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of small stories of individual soldiers, their families, their courage, their hardships. Tonight, the Civil War comes home to what was then called the area west of Grapevine, where scores of soldiers returned after the war and where many others, both north and south, migrated to as a good place to raise their families, just as today. I know you'll be captivated by Mike's retelling of some of their stories. Mike Patterson.
Thank you very much. I have a few things to show you before we start. A couple of guns to begin with. When the war began, there were lots more soldiers than guns. Lots of men had to wait a long time to get in the Army and actually do anything. A lot of men went to the Army with guns like this. This is a flintlock. A lot of them some guys went to the Army with the gun their grandfather used in the American Revolution even. These things are, some of them are pretty accurate, some of them are not. Lots of soldiers on both sides use these. I want to show you how the ignition system works. Both these guns, this is a flintlock, that's a percussion lock. On both of them, you have to pour the powder in the barrel, then put the projectile in on top of that, and then ram it down with the ramrod. And then you have to have some sort.
Who's that before you get shot?
Yeah. Well, the other guy isn't loading any faster than you are. Unless you were fighting the Indians, and then you were at a distinct disadvantage. And that's why it took so long to protect us from the Indians. Anyway, to get this thing to fire, back here in the back, there's a little hole drilled in the back of the barrel that comes out to the outside. And there's a little pan right here where you put some powder. I'm not going to do it in here because it'll set the smoke alarm off probably. Put a little powder in there, put that down, pull the hammer back. When you pull the trigger, there's a piece of flint in here that goes down and strikes this, knocks it out of the way, sets this powder on fire. It burns through the hole, and then off goes the bullet. And this thing shoots unbelievably hard. It really kicks. Obviously, you have a problem if it's raining. You have a problem if this powder out here goes off and the powder inside doesn't. You don't know whether to, you don't do anything for a minute. Later on, you have to get the ball out and start over. But anyway, I'll let it spark so you can see how much of a spark it makes. And that's all it takes to set off the powder. This is an improvement over that, and the U.S. Army took a lot of flintlock guns and changed them, converted them to something called percussion lock. This thing works just like a cap pistol. It has a little thing called a nipple up here. You put a cap over just like you use in a cap pistol, and when you pull the trigger, it fires a little thing of fire, whatever you call a little thing of fire, down in here to where the powder is, and this thing goes off, and it'll knock you sideways. It is very powerful. I'll put a cap on it. Let's see how the cap sounds. You don't generate any smoke with a cap, so we can do that inside. These things have fulminate of mercury in them. They're just little tiny copper things. It's a little, that's nothing compared to what the rifle does when it goes off, believe me. I've got a bayonet. Almost nobody in the Civil War was killed by a bayonet, only in the movies. They're a lot of trouble to carry, they're a lot of trouble to use, and any soldiers who ever got close enough that they might need to use their bayonet, they usually use their gun as a club instead. But it has a little turn and a lock thing on it, like that. Most of the time soldiers use them for entrenching or cooking stuff with them, or stick them in the ground and put a candle in the top of them. Most soldiers didn't take them very long, or didn't keep them very long. All right, let's take a look at some pictures. There are a lot of pictures in here of Southlake people that I had never seen 2 or 3 weeks ago. I sort of put out some all-points bulletins on the internet about some of our soldiers, and pictures have been coming in. A Confederate soldier from here would have looked about like that. Some soldiers never got a uniform during their entire term of service. There are a lot of reenactors around these days that want to look like soldiers and act like soldiers. And the best advice that they get now is dress agriculturally if you want to be an authentic-looking Confederate soldier. These guys are about to go into captivity. They were Confederate soldiers captured at Gettysburg, and they're fixing to take a long walk for a long time. Up north, probably somewhere in Illinois or Ohio, to a prison camp, and they probably have gathered up all the gear they can find to take with them to try to survive their time in prison. 61 to 65 is when the war happened. We're going to have a sesquicentennial of the Civil War pretty soon, so that's going to be in a lot of people's minds. We have a project we've worked on for years now in Northeast Tarrant County to recognize soldiers who lived, died, owned land, and were buried in Northeast Tarrant County. And that's defined as the county line on the east, the county line on the north, Highway 377 on the west, and the West Fork of the Trinity on the south. That's a big piece of land, and we've discovered and verified over 500 who lived here at one time or another in that area. This guy's a pretty, I guess you'd say, representative Confederate soldier. Lots of these guys took big knives with them when they left, and they probably threw them away within a week or two when they found out how useless they were and how much trouble they were to carry. They were pretty good for entrenching and pretty good for chopping wood, but that's about all. This guy's probably 18 or 19, which is probably most Confederate soldiers were between 18 and 30, something like that. They were young people. They went for all kinds of reasons, patriotism and pride, and just for something to do, for something for fun. A lot of these guys had never been any further from home than they could walk in a day. And so they jumped at the chance to go somewhere. Pride had a lot to do with it. Imagine what we would do today if Barack Obama called for 75,000 troops to come to Texas and make us do something that we didn't want to do. Well, a lot of these guys responded to that kind of feeling when Lincoln called for troops to come south. Wasn't for money. There was a Confederate soldier who lived here in Southlake named Narwhal Joyce. And he wrote in his pension application, "I was always a private. I never drew a cent of money or a garment of clothing during the entire war." So in all those years, he got no clothes and no money, but he kept at it. There were some extremes. There's a soldier who is buried in Hearst, who was a Union soldier, who was 62 years old when the war started. He's the oldest one I found here. He enlisted in an infantry company, of all things, and he lasted for 2 years before they finally sent him home. He had 6 sons who were also in the Union infantry. Only one of them died in the service. 4 of them wound up coming here, and the dad and the 4 sons are on our memorial that's over in Bedford. Nobody left here to fight for the North. If anybody had those sympathies, they left quietly or they kept them to themselves, because your life expectancy would not have been very long here if you were very loud about those sympathies. There was a guy in Fort Worth named Anthony Bewley who was an outspoken Unionist, and he wound up spending most of the Civil War on top of a building in Fort Worth, rotting where they threw him, just as an example to anybody else that might have those ideas. In Gainesville, not very far from here, they hanged a bunch of Union sympathizers. Oddly enough, not every county in Texas wanted to secede. Collin County, which is McKinney, Cook County, which is Gainesville, Fannin County, which is Bonham, and Grayson County, which is Sherman, voted not to leave the Union. Tarrant County voted to leave the Union, and Dallas did too, but those 4 counties up north of us didn't. And a lot of counties in central Texas didn't, where there were a lot of Germans. Slavery wasn't a big deal here. In 1850, there were only 9 slaves in this whole county, and they were all owned by people out here in this part of in northeast Tarrant County. 10 years later, there were 731 here, which was still a very small percentage of the population. So slavery wasn't an issue to most of the guys who fought here. Okay, what's next? This is the last surviving soldier of the Civil War. He was a Union soldier from Minnesota. He died in 1956. His name was Albert Wilson. Toward the time when the old soldiers were dying off, a lot of people showed up who claimed to be soldiers who weren't. There were several men who claimed to be Confederate soldiers who weren't, who lived after this man. But from the records and the proofs that we looked at, this is the last one. 1956, he was 109. The last Confederate soldier died in Alabama in 1951. His name is Pleasant Crump, and I've done everything in the world to find a picture of him and can't. I haven't gone back there to look, but the gas prices weren't the way they are now. We'll go back and look and see if I can find one. But he lived until 51. Incidentally, there's one World War I guy left, and he had a birthday last month. He was 108. He lives in West Virginia. So out of all the millions of guys, there's only one of those left. And World War II men are passing from the scene at the rate of about 1,200 each day now. So before long, there won't be any World War II vets left. 4 years ago, there was a big deal on the internet in the newspapers about this lady who was the last surviving Civil War widow. Alberta Martin, Alabama. And she had a huge state funeral, and people came from all over the country and made a big deal about the funeral, and they had a mile-long procession and all that. A foundation was set up to take care of her final expenses. She's a pretty remarkable lady. She was 21, and her hubby was 81 when they married. And they had a child. And after the old man died, she married his grandson. And they were married for more than 50 years. So I never get to meet her, but she was quite a little lady. And then all the brouhaha surrounding her death. Okay, what's next? We found out there's one more still alive. Maudie Hopkins of Lexa, Arkansas, and my buddy Jimmy Reynolds and I drove all the way over there. She lived almost the Mississippi River. We drove over there in 2005 to meet her and get her picture taken with her. And like the other lady, she was 19 when she married an 86-year-old vet. And she had a pretty interesting story that would take a long time to tell. But I sent her flowers on her birthday for the rest of her life. After I met her, she's born on Pearl Harbor Day, so it was easy to remember. But and I intended to go to her funeral, and I didn't find out about it until the morning of her funeral, and I didn't have time to get over there. She died in August of last year. Okay, what's next? This guy is buried grapevine. He may be the last Union soldier alive in the state of Texas. I haven't been able to find anybody who lived after he did. He was a carpenter. My buddy Jimmy Reynolds remembers seeing him one time. He said he had to bend over he had to bend his head down to come into the room wherever they were. But he lied about his age to get in the Union Army, lived until 1946, and I haven't had any luck getting information out of the archives about him, but I didn't know that he was a soldier. I wonder if he was a better shot with his rifle than he was with his hammer. We've got an ouchie down there. The last Confederate soldier in this part of the country was a guy named Henry Dean Lipscomb, who died in Grapevine in 1941. And I've seen pictures of him in the newspaper, but I haven't ever found a real good one. Okay, what's next? This is the lady that got me interested in all this. She was born in 1872. She was my great-grandmother. She lived with us until 1965 when she died. And this next slide is the way that I knew her. And that's my little sister, who's now 51. We called her Old Granny, not because she was old necessarily. My grandmother, who was her daughter, lived with us also. And my grandmother was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and working hard like a man all day, every day. And for some reason, I got to call her Good Granny and this one Old Granny. But, man, I'd give anything in the world to get an hour to talk to her now. I really didn't get real interested until we started cleaning out her stuff after she died. But she told me a lot of stories about her father, who is the next slide. Harvey and Mary Sparta were her parents, and he was a Georgia cavalryman and talked at length about the war. We had a lot of elderly visitors to my house, and a lot of them were other grandkids of this couple. So I wound up talking to a lot of people who were kin to these folks and knew them. He lived until 1914, and when I really got interested in the 60s, there were a lot of people around who knew him, who remembered him. He has that weird colored eye that he has. He's blind in that light colored eye. He got blinded when he's chopping wood. A chip of wood flew in his eye one time after he came here to Texas. She had 4 brothers who were in the Confederate Army. He had 3 brothers who were in the Confederate Army. And Cheeks Parker Road over there is named for him. And they're buried over Smithfield. Okay, what's next? When I put together this list of soldiers, the first thing I did was to go to all the cemeteries and write down the names and dates of the people who were the right age to have been soldiers. That gave me a list to start with. This guy was a soldier who was buried at a little cemetery over on Cheeks Parker Road. Cemetery's not there anymore. The development got it, but I went over there when they were bulldozing and found a few of the stones. This is one I got out. Actually, I found this one in the back of a workman's truck, and he tried to sell it to me. And he didn't sell it to me. I got it anyway. But this guy was shot while he was plowing his field over in Bedford. A lot of these guys met violent ends even after they came back from the war. Okay. It's tough for several reasons to find things on our soldiers here. Our courthouse burned in 1876, and just about everything in it was burned. So it's tough to find out exactly where somebody lived back in the Civil War era. Okay, next. They think the courthouse was burned to get rid of evidence in one single trial that was going on at the time involving the Ku Klux that was operating here then. But anyway, they got those trial records and everything else. We also, our 1890 federal census got burned up accidentally, and so we're missing it. The one thing that would help us more than anything is the 1860 United States Census. We have it for every county in Texas except Tarrant County. Wonder where it is. What's next? Maybe there. I don't know. I've looked everywhere else. Maybe it's in there. We have come up with some pretty interesting pictures in the course of this. This is one of them. Jeff Souter was a Union soldier from Indiana. He came over to Hearst. I think there's a road named over there for him, and maybe an elementary school too, but I know there's a road named for him. He and his wife were married for ever and ever and ever, and she got sick and died, and he didn't last. I think he lasted about 48 hours. They knew he was going to die, so they waited, and somehow or another got hold of this double casket and buried them together in it. They're buried at Arwine Cemetery in Hearst. This little lady is the granddaughter of that real super-duper old Union soldier. So she was married to a Union soldier, and her grandfather was a Union soldier. Probably a pretty unique situation. Okay. This is the old fellow that Hearst is named for. Was a Tennessee infantryman. Got tons of descendants around here. I know a lot of them. And a little bit kin to him. He came from the same place in Tennessee that my folks came from. Remarkable guy. Back in the 70s, I went and interviewed all of his grandchildren. He had over 100 grandchildren. In the 1970s, lots of them were still alive. Lots of them knew him, remembered him. On the day he died, he was in good enough shape he could jump up in the air and click his heels together and not fall down. And just tons of stories. One of my favorite stories about him is he went over to his daughter-in-laws to admire their brand new well that they had just finished. He had false teeth, but he didn't use them except when he was eating. He kept them in his shirt pocket or coat pocket, and he was eating an apple. And he looked down in the well, and the top half of his false teeth fell in. And of course, he couldn't get them back out. And I always wondered, I don't know if I'd drink out of that well after that or not. I don't know. But anyway, he's the big guy. What's next? This fellow that Colleyville is named for was a Union soldier who came here after the war, and lots of the old Confederate soldiers had enough confidence in him that he became their family doctor. Okay. Now, here's some Southlake pictures that probably a lot of you have never seen before. There's an old soldier buried in Hood Cemetery out off Peytonville Road named Thomas Higgins, who died in 1880. We don't have a picture of him, but we did find this picture of some of his children and his wife. He had twin daughters. I don't know if that's the twin daughters or not. But anyway, they have lots of descendants still here. Next picture is those twin daughters. You almost never see twins from that, back in the 1800s, early 1900s. I don't know why, but you almost never do. These two gals married Oklahoma farmers and moved to Oklahoma later on in their life. Okay, what's next? This man's buried at White's Chapel. He was a South Carolina infantryman. If you've been here a long, long time, you might remember he had a son who lived down there just south of White's Chapel Church named L.T. Cathcart. And then his L.T. Cathcart had a daughter who lived down there, Mrs. Virgil Cash. So if you've lived here a long time, you may have known them. This guy died in the Masonic Old Folks Home in Arlington, and they brought him back up here close to where he was living earlier, buried in White's Chapel. Okay. This picture just showed up not very long ago. These two guys lived in the White's Chapel community. Jasper Denny on the left, Francis Denny on the right. Neither of them are buried here. Jasper moved on out west into Parker County and Springtown, and Francis went back to Arkansas. Francis had a hard time here. I can't remember all this. I'll read it to you. In 1878, Francis owned the right. On September 29th, he lost his 8-month-old daughter. 2 days later, he lost his wife and his 17-year-old son. On November 18th, his daughter Priscilla died. He got remarried almost immediately. And then on May 30th, 1880, his infant son from his new marriage died. Later that year, he kind of threw up his hands and went back to Arkansas and died in 1881. So he had a hard 3-year period there. Next picture is his brother Jasper and Jasper Denny's wife. They stayed here until around 1890, and then they went out west, I guess, to raise cattle out around Springtown. Okay? Here's Jasper Denny on the left, and he had there were 4 boys in that family who were Confederate soldiers, and the 2 on the left never came here. They stayed in Arkansas, but there's another picture of Jasper. Okay? Just found this picture. I've known about this guy for 35 or 40 years, and just in the last 2 weeks found a picture of him finally. His name is John G. Valentine. He's buried out at Hood Cemetery. He was in a Missouri Cavalry, Confederate Missouri Cavalry Regiment. He lived where Highland and North White's Chapel come together, on the northeast corner. That's right across the street from that church that's over there on Highland. And he has no headstone right now in Hood Cemetery, but we're in the process of getting a headstone for him from the Veterans Administration and from some other soldiers that are out there at Hood Cemetery also. Okay, what's next? This man's buried at White's Chapel. Came here from Georgia with that huge bunch of people who came from Dade County, Georgia. I knew a couple of his granddaughters. One of them told me an interesting story about him. Back in Dade County and Walker County, Georgia, there are lots of limestone caves. And when he was a young guy, he went cave exploring and got in there, and his lantern went out, and he was, if you've been in those caves, it is black, suffocatingly black in there. He didn't know which direction. He knew up and down. That's all he knew. And he waited and waited and waited, and finally he said, I'm going to lay down and pray for help. And when he laid down, he saw some light, just that he could see from only the floor, and he got out. But interesting man. He had a first cousin. Let's see. His 2 first cousins who were soldiers here also. This guy's buried at Lonesome Dove. He's one of those who came here in the 1840s with the Missouri Colony, which was the first group of settlers that came here. When he applied for his pension in the late 1800s, he claimed to be the last survivor of that colony, and he also claimed to be the oldest person in Tarrant County. And he wasn't by a long shot, but I guess he thought that would make his pension application look a little better. But he's one of 4 brothers who were in the Confederate Army from here. His dad is buried at Lonesome Dove, and I think he may be the first permanent settler in Tarrant County. I'm not sure, but I think he may be. His dad's also one of the only War of 1812 soldiers who ever wound up here. His name's Ambrose Foster. Okay? Most of these folks are buried at White's Chapel. This is Charles Hogue's family. He was from Arkansas, served in an Arkansas group. He was only 19 when the war ended, so he's one of the young ones. He came here about 1870. He had 7 children. 3, 4, 5, 6. They lost one. It wasn't here when the picture was taken. Okay. And another picture of him. A lot of these old Confederates were long, skinny guys. This guy didn't fight, but he had 4 sons who did. This is Abram Bias. He's buried at Mount Gilead in Keller. Came here from Louisiana in the 50s. 2 of his sons are buried at Lonesome Dove. One of his soldier sons is buried at White's Chapel, and the other one is buried at Mount Gilead, I think. I found a sand rock over there that said R. Bias on it, and I think it's probably his son, which is pretty close to him. Okay? This is the son that's buried at White's Chapel. His name's Joseph Bias. The old house he lived in stood until pretty recently. Later on in life, he went over and lived in what is now Colleyville on Tinker Road. There was an old house almost down on Grapevine Highway that the Forsyth family lived in for a million years. There was a Redenta's garden or something there recently, and that's where he lived the last part of his life. I knew that little girl in his lap. She married a man named Paul Perkins and lived over on Lake Road beside me when I was growing up. This guy is buried at White's Chapel. Elihu Newton was a pretty famous Baptist preacher. He lived several places in Texas. He represented Tarrant County in the Texas legislature 2 different times. There are a lot of people around who named their kids after him. He's pretty famous, pretty well-liked man. In fact, in the morning I'm going to a funeral of a guy whose dad was named Elihu Newton Mumford after this man. Now, let's see. This guy is William Howard. He lived in Grapevine the last part of his life. He's buried at White's Chapel, and he has quite a few folks still here. One of them was real prominent in fixing the Grapevine area history book that we did a while back. Next picture. L. Nathan Hudgens had 4 sons in the Confederate Army. One of them was buried at White's Chapel. One of them was buried at Smithfield, and 2 of them got killed. They didn't get killed, they died of sickness while they were in the Confederate Army and were buried back east on the battlefields where they died. Incidentally, your chances of dying from disease were much higher than they were from getting shot and dying from a bullet. Country boys were thrown into regiments with people from the cities, and they were suddenly exposed to diseases that we wouldn't even miss work for. Because these country guys had no immunity to things. Mr. Hudgens was married twice. Let's see. He had a bunch of children. Let me see. He had 19 children with 2 wives. Okay? He doesn't have the record, though. So far, this guy does. This guy lived in just inside the North Tarrant County line. There's something in Grapevine Lake named after him. I think there's a Merle Park or Merle Street or something.
Merle Road also.
Yeah. That's him. Let me read you something from his obituary in the Grapevine Sun. His first marriage was to Miss Margaret Cox in 1852. Of the 11 children born to this union, 3 are still living. His wife died in 1975. In the same year, he was married to Mary Jane Davis. To this union, 4 children were born, one of whom is still living. His wife died in 1982. In 1983, he was married to Miss Margaret Peeler. To this union, 4 children were born, 2 of whom are still living. He was married to Mrs. Harlan Higgins in 1899, and all 4 of their children are still alive. That's 23. Next picture. Now you can find a picture of his house. And it's under Grapevine Lake now. All right, here's another White's Chapel person. William Franklin Wilkinson. And I graduated from high school with one of his great-great-grandsons named Dennis Ash. He has a lot of descendants here. He's another one of those that came with that huge migration to White's Chapel from Dade County, Georgia. He had a brother who was also a soldier who also came here, and I haven't found a good photograph of him yet. Okay? Samuel Houston Thompson is one of the Southlake people. He's buried at Mount Gilead. His dad is buried at Mount Gilead, and as far as I know, his dad is the only soldier in the Texas Revolution that ever wound up here. Also, the only guy I ever knew among the soldiers who was bitten by an alligator when he was a little kid. See, there was a little bit of an advantage to asking questions when the old guys were still here. They knew stuff like that. It's interesting. Pope Lowe was definitely a Southlake person. He's buried at Lonesome Dove. He lived right across the road, sort of, from White's Chapel Church. He had a gin here, which was steam-powered. Okay? There's about 40 people in that picture who were probably Confederate soldiers. We know a total of none of them. Boy, I wish somebody had written some names somewhere on that. But there's a lot of really intriguing-looking old guys in that picture. I imagine this was some kind of a conference, church conference meeting. But there must be a lot of Southlake and Grapevine people in there. I just wish we knew who they were. Okay. This man is buried at White's Chapel. I knew one of his sons-in-law, a man named Walter Couch, who lived until about 1992 or something like that. This man's surface is different from most of the others. This guy's what you call a galvanized Yankee. He fought in 2 different regiments in the Confederate Army, and he was captured and put in a northern prison camp. And the Plains Indians were smart people. They knew that all the Federal soldiers were getting pulled back here to do something. And the U.S. Army needed soldiers out there to fight the Indians too, and they made a deal with some of these Confederate soldiers to release them if they joined the Union Army and go out west to fight the Indians. And they were promised that they would never be put in battle against any of their Confederate comrades. And this guy took them up on it and got to see a whole lot of the world he wouldn't have gotten to see otherwise. When he came back here and he's buried right down at White's Chapel. Okay, what's next? This guy lived in the Jellicoe community, which is, his house was southeast of the intersection of Davis Boulevard and 1709. And his house sat there until pretty recently, up on a hilltop on the east side of the road. I looked when I was over there the other day and I couldn't see it anymore. But he was an artilleryman from South Carolina. He was the postmaster at Jellicoe from 1900 to 1903. Okay, what's next? This is another man who's buried at Hood Cemetery. Anybody know where Hood Cemetery is? Anybody ever seen it? You ought to go look at it. It's used to be way out in the country. Now it's not, but it really is a nice little island of tranquility out there off Peytonville Road. Old Mr. Jemison was a Union soldier from Missouri. His father once in the 1840s tried to swim across the Mississippi River carrying a bunch of his belongings on a little raft, and he didn't make it. But somehow or other they saved some of his belongings. He had a little Bible on that little raft that got water stained. I've had the thing in my hands looking at it. It's really neat. Lady in Grapevine used to have it, and I haven't tried to find it. She's dead, and I went to school with one of her sons. I hope they still have it. I'd like to get a photograph of it to put in here. His wife there was named Valentine, and she had 2 first cousins here who were Confederate soldiers. And they apparently got along all right after the war. Okay, what's next? There's another Southlake man buried at Dove. He was justice of peace here for a long time with an office in Grapevine. Okay. Now, here's an example of bad photography. Back about 1900 or so, it became the fashion to take your little photographs, your tintypes and your little paper photographs to photographers, and they would make you these big blow-ups to put in frames. And the outcome depended entirely on the skill of the so-called photographer. I have one at home in an oval frame that's perfect. And I've got the original photograph. I've even got the receipt from when they paid for it. And it's perfect. It's beautiful. This one isn't. This is, more like a caricature. I have the idea that the guy who did these, everybody in all his probably came out looking about the same. But this guy's buried in White's Chapel. That's an unusual first name. You don't ever see that. He had a great-grandfather whose name was Hercules Ogles. And by the time the name got passed down through 3 or 4 generations, this is what it wound up being, Harkness. Okay. I got this picture about 5 or 6 days ago. Southlake man named Moses Allen. First time I've ever known about him forever, but first time I ever got to see what he looked like. He and his wife Rosanna are buried at White's Chapel. And there is not as much an age difference as it looks like. She was only 12 years younger than he was. So somebody's done an awful lot of aging there in a hurry. He was a slave overseer on a plantation in Georgia when he met her when she was a child. They didn't get married for years later. First time I saw this picture was about 10 or 12 days ago. This is John Hare. He's Mrs. Stacy's great-grandfather, I guess. Mr. Tate's grandfather, is that correct? He's buried down in White's Chapel. He and his wife were charter members of that Advent Christian church that used to be over there just across the street from White's Chapel. This is another example of one of those pictures that was a little bitty picture and got big, but they did a pretty good job on this one. He still has some character. He looks like an individual. He doesn't look like a cartoon figure. And the one of his wife is also just as good. Joseph White, an odd-looking gentleman, to say the least. He was too old to go to the war, but he had two sons who fought the war. I haven't found pictures of them, but I found pictures of him, so I thought we'd put it in here. This guy's great-grandson was a good buddy of mine. He and I cleaned up Mount Gilead Cemetery one time. And this fellow was taken walking on Pleasant Run Road when he died in 1887, and they found him laying in the road. The guy that told me that was a good-sized kid when they found him. I used to sit in church beside his grandson, and one of my little jobs was to kick his foot to keep him from snoring and disrupting church. So I like you, White. Some of you may have known him, but I'd kick him once in a while. That's old Joseph's wife. She also was kind of unusual looking. If you know any of the Whites, the silhouette, they still have those ears today. I mean, I can look at somebody and tell they remember that family from those ears. This picture also just showed up, Spencer Graham. And the last time I came to one of your meetings, one of his great-grandsons was in your meeting. And I think somebody said that he had passed away since then. I met a great-grandson of his name, whose last name was Joyce at one time. And I can't remember the name of the gentleman who was here the other time. This guy's buried in Hood Cemetery also. The family still has his land grant from 1860. And the signature is especially neat. Go to the next one. That's really Sam Houston's signature. Back in those days, the governor signed them all by hand individually. So that's a very important document. One of the things we do to commemorate soldiers is get headstones for them if they don't have gravestones already. I work at a monument company, and I carve all kinds of other stuff on them after we get them. When we get them from the government, they have everything down to the death date. You can carve anything else you want to on there. One of the reasons I went to work for a monument company, I was paying so much to have people do this that I decided I just wanted to learn to do it myself. And now, a stone like this doesn't cost us anything. I have it delivered to our shop, and I cut the stuff in it and go and set it. And they're blank on the back. Sometimes we put the wife's stuff on the back of them. And on the next slide, I found this neat soldier on a book cover, and we copied him, blew him up with a Xerox machine, high tech, and cut him into the back of a stone. He looks pretty neat back there. Okay, what's next? Now, very quickly, you see somebody on here you have a picture of, make yourself a note of it and email me and tell me about it because I want a copy of it. These guys are all Lonesome Dove guys. Okay? Let's see. These are all Lonesome Dove guys. Williams was a Yankee. The rest of them were Confederates. Okay? Kate and Elsie were Union. Cook and Foster were Confederates. Elsie got hurt, got stabbed in the eye socket with a bayonet when two of his friends were fighting. They weren't fighting the Confederates, they weren't fighting the enemy. He just happened to be in the way when they were having a drunken brawl, and he was permanently disabled from that. Okay. Top two are White's Chapel, bottom two are Lonesome Dove. All White's Chapel. All White's Chapel. Top guy's a Union soldier, others are Confederates, and they're all White's Chapel. All White's Chapel, all Confederates. Top two guys are brothers, but one of them decided to spell his name a different way after he came here to Texas. All Confederates, all White's Chapel. let's see, the bottom two are Union soldiers, father and son. They're buried, and all four of those guys are buried at White's Chapel. Augustus Creed had a brother who died during the service and didn't get back here. Okay? All White's Chapel. I've got a stone for Wallace Christmas at my shop right now that I haven't finished to put up for him. He doesn't have a stone right now. Okay? It's all White's Chapel. Top three are White's Chapel. Bottom two are Lonesome Dove. All White's Chapel, two brothers and an uncle there among the Austins. Those are all Hood Cemetery people. Eves does not have a stone, doesn't have anything. William Martin has one, but it's a sandstone you can't read anymore. And luckily I have a picture of it I took about 40 years ago when you can read it, so I know which one it is. Jemison was a Union soldier, the others were Confederates. All Confederates and all Hood Cemetery. Now, that's the place on the internet. She said it was on your website, so yes. That's the place on the internet. I have worked most of my life gathering up stuff on these Confederate soldiers. Got nearly 500 biographies on this website right now. Lots of pictures of the soldiers, lots of pictures of their stones. The last time I did a word count on a lot of stuff, it was over 300,000 words, so there's a lot of it. This is the Soldiers Memorial that we have put up at Bedford. And it's 6 of those stones. Each one of them has about 70-something names on it. They're about 5 feet tall out of the ground, 6 inches thick, weigh about 1,200 pounds apiece, covered with names on both sides. There's a biography for every one of these guys online, and also out there on the ground there's a dedicatory stone that explains it. And there's also a little stone that has a website address on it. And I've got another one at my shop right now that I don't have paid for it yet, but as soon as I get it paid for, I've got enough names to fill another one and take it over there and set it with those. It's the Bedford Church of Christ on Bedford Road. The last few days, let's say the last few months, I have really got concerned about the country. And I've been putting something in about that at the end of every slideshow, so just grin and bear it. Okay, two more. One of my favorite guys of all time, Confederate soldiers and Ronald Reagan are my favorite people. Okay. And I think the last one is the end. Yeah. That's it.
Does anyone have any questions?
Do you know how many Confederate soldiers died during the Civil War in total?
No, not offhand I don't. You have to, it depends on who you ask. I know a lot of them fought. If I put all the soldiers in both armies on those stones like I have, 6 feet apart, the line would stretch for 67 miles. And that's with about 75 soldiers on each stone. I've heard some people say as many as 1 in 10 didn't make it back, but I don't think it was that high. Your chances of getting measles or the mumps or a superficial cut and dying of gangrene were a whole lot higher than getting shot with a gun. Almost nobody got killed with a bayonet. Almost nobody got killed with a sword. Lots and lots of people got stepped on by a horse and got a broken bone and got gangrene, or accidentally shot themselves when they were cleaning their rifle, or shot the guy in front of them when they were marching accidentally. Any kind of an accident might be fatal to you back then. Okay. Yes?
Did they join a Texas unit, all these Confederates, or were they just go off?
Probably 50% of these guys that you saw tonight, these are all guys with local connection, except that old guy at the first who was the last survivor of the whole war. About half of them were in Texas units, and the rest of them were scattered all over everywhere, principally Missouri and Tennessee and Georgia. this Southlake was settled by lots and lots of Georgians and a surprising number of Illinois people who had been in the South before they moved to Illinois for a little while. So there were two regiments, two companies of people who left here that had most of our local guys in them.
You talked the other day about what they ate and how they could sleep.
I can't hear anymore. I have to come over here.
You talked the other day about what they ate and how they could sleep in the rain.
Yeah, I guess I ought to talk about that. Oh, I got two other things to show you out there too. We made some hardtack. And after having seen it, we're not going to try to eat it. But I want you to get an idea of what they were trying to eat. They had to, usually they broke it up with the butts of their guns and then soaked it in coffee or tea or water to get it a little more palatable. They fried a lot of it in bacon fat. It's really tough stuff.
It used to be just water and flour and salt. No leveling or
All
to
flour.
rise.
But it's it's amazing how much of this stuff you see in museums that was made in the Civil War. And it's pretty much like it was when they made it. Pretty much, yes.
You know, I think that one side had 650,000, the other side had 500,000 in the Civil War.
Casualties.
Yeah,
Yeah, that might sound pretty good.
fantastic number. I think the South lost the most men, but I'm not dead certain.
Your chances of, if you got wounded, your chances of surviving it in the Civil War were about 7 to 1. Chances a little better on the Union side than the Confederate side. By the time the Korean War came along, if you got wounded, your chances were about 50 to 1 that you were going to make it. So, if I had gotten shot, and these old bullets were real soft and real big, and they didn't clip through bones, when they hit a bone, they just shattered it, and the amputation was the only thing that might save your life. And I can't imagine laying there knowing that when the doctor finally gets to you after having operated on 20 or 30 other people and wiping his hands off on his shirt after the last one, that you were going to get your leg sawed off. That'd be pretty tough to take. I don't know how they did. What time is it? How's our time?
8
o'clock.
Okay. I got one other thing I'll show you if we got time. If these guys wanted to start a fire, here's how they did it. Flint and steel. A little piece of steel made into a kind of a C shape so you can keep your knuckles out of the way. This is flint, like the Indians made points and knives and stuff out of. And when you strike them together, you get sparks. What you've got to do is get something to catch a spark for just a minute. Now, you all know the process for if you have a little tiny ember, you blow air on it, and, so we're not going to go the whole way because it will make a lot of smoke. Here's the key thing you never see on television when they're starting fires. Pioneers and soldiers had something called char cloth. This is cotton cloth that's been burned in the absence of oxygen. So what I do is put it in this little can, put it on the stove, has a little hole right in the top of it. And it'll burn, but it won't catch fire. So all I've got left is carbon. So all I got to do to get a spark that will last a long, long time and start a fire is get a spark to land on this stuff and catch. You can't ever get it to do it when you want to show something. Let me get down where I can get it hard. Get it out of there, it's going to burn it all up. That gets plenty hot when you put it in something. Whoa, got to get rid of it. But it's still burning. And this works, the char cloth will work when it's wet, but this stuff will work when it's wet too. So it's, uh-oh. All my others have caught fire too.
Oh darn, now he'll have to make some.
Make some more.
Please, baby, please.
Hardly survivor is who you have to start
Look
with
at
those
that.
fires.
You got to sit it down pretty soon.
Get out.
Anyway, that's the show. It's been a great hobby that I've had since I was about 13 years old. And I work on, I was telling Jack Weisman a while ago, I work on it every day. Sometimes I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go plug away on it for a while. It's been pretty fun. Thank you. Thank you.
To also recognize Rebecca Utley, and she's one of the people who is a descendant of Spencer Graham. And it was her father, Gerald Shivers, whom I think you met. He was a longtime member.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
good to see you, Rebecca. And one last thing, tell us how the soldiers slept in the rain. You mentioned that on
Oh,
Saturday.
well, they got pretty hardened to being outside, and they could lay down in a driving rainstorm and just go to sleep. No cover, no nothing. They put their hand or their arm over their face to keep it from hitting them in the face and waking them up. But they could just get up and take off. No shelter at all.
Very interesting.
And it was nothing at all for some of these guys who were on picket duty to look over the next morning and the guy on picket duty with them would be dead. He just froze to death. I don't know how they did it. They were tough old guys. If you have something in here, a photograph or something that you'd like to let me know about, I brought a bunch of cards. My name and phone number and email are on the back of these cards. And it's better to email me because I'm getting where I can't hear on the telephone. So anyway, I'll leave the cards right up here. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.